Okay, so there's something that I want you all to be aware of, and it's called the cultural industry in Canada. It's really important in the context of Bill C-10. So many of you guys know what Bill C-10 is. If you don't, you need to educate yourself. Bill C-10 is this piece of legislation that Justin Trudeau has put in front of Parliament that virtually all political stripes agree is a massive assault on freedom of speech in Canada. Now, over this last weekend, the Heritage Minister, Trudeau's guy who's responsible for pushing this disastrous bill, was on a television program on Sunday where he basically admitted that the bill was going to regulate some, if not all, user accounts on social media in Canada, which is why there's been such massive outcry about this. But I want to talk to you today about the cultural industry. And so when Justin Trudeau's like, well, Bill C-10 is going to promote the cultural industry in Canada, what is he talking about? This is something that's not really been talked about in Canada a lot, but it's something that you absolutely need to know about, and that you need to share this video so that you can get the word out. You know, you often hear people talk about like big oil or big pharma. Well, big culture is a thing in Canada. So what is it? There's this really great article today. It's in the Financial Post, the National Post, and it's by Peter Menzies, who I believe has had former senior roles in government. And it's called, Who's Killing Free Internet Speech? Canada's Culture Industry. There's a huge amount of grant funds that go out every year to promote Canadian culture or Canadian content. And you know, in previous generations, a lot of the content that came into Canada through, you know, television, when cable television was still a big thing, was predominantly from the United States. So, you know, well-intentioned people were like, okay, what do we do to ensure that Canadian voices are heard and that, you know, Canadians aren't just saturated with American content? That's really where the culture industry started in Canada. A lot of grants went to produce Canadian content. This also led to a series of regulations in Canada that only allowed for Canadian broadcasters. I'm really oversimplifying this, but there's a lot of monopoly. There's like a monopoly situation in Canada that occurs because of broadcasting rules to essentially that was originally designed to ensure that Canadian content would make it to Canadian airwaves. But all of you guys know one thing, right? Which is we're creating Canadian content right now. The internet and social media has completely disrupted how content is created and consumed in this country. And rather than looking at ways to embrace the fact that social media has really, I think, created a lot of equity for different voices, intersectional voices in Canada, people that couldn't afford lobbyists to get these big grants from the government or poke into this monopolistic structure of broadcasting can now come to you. I mean, how many of you guys can go onto a YouTube channel and hear from a variety of Canadian voices, and also voices that have been marginalized in the past, Indigenous voices, racialized voices, voices from the LGBTQ community. In a lot of ways, social media and social media platforms have allowed people to bring their voices forward. But the other thing is that these platforms have allowed influencers, the whole concept of influencers. If you're watching this and you're an influencer, if you're, you know, somebody who has a large Instagram following or Facebook following, and you know, you're promoting businesses or you're promoting things, this is something that the culture industry does not want you to do. Why? For two reasons. First of all, the culture industry, and by that I mean like the lobbyists and people, the consultants and stuff who have for, you know, a generation solely benefited, almost solely benefited from government grants. It's been a very insular community. They try to make sure that things don't disrupt that. You've got to think about this like the culture industry being the taxi industry pre-Uber, okay? They are benefiting from you not being able to be an influencer. They want you to be regulated because their business model doesn't work the same way that it did 30 or 40 years ago. And they were really the genesis behind Bill C-10. So this whole article about who's killing Canada's free internet speech, Canada's culture industry, I want you to start using the term big culture. They're the lobbyists, the people who receive grants, who really don't want their monopolistic structure on things to be disrupted. The other people that are part of big culture are people who have a monopoly on Canada's broadcasting systems and the internet. So Bell, Telus, Rogers, the CBC. These are people, these are organizations that, CBC is slightly different, but those big three, the incumbents that jack up your phone bills, right? They also have a stake in Canada's culture industry. They're part of big culture. So of course they want you as an influencer or somebody on social media to be subject to the same broadcast rules that they are, which is preposterous, by the way, because they know that what's happening in social media and with influencers is, it essentially is disrupting their business model, that they can't exist in the current business model that is totally subject to regulations and all of these sorts of things without continued government intervention. So rather than letting, intersectional voices and new creative content come to the forefront, what is Justin Trudeau doing? He's responding to big culture because big culture props him up. Big culture props his government up, right? There's so many people in the big culture industry that are card-carrying capital L liberals. And so this is something that Peter Menzies, he hasn't put it that bluntly. He kind of, was less partisan in his speech, but he really talked about the fact that big culture is what is behind Bill C-10, and Justin Trudeau is pushing it. I'm so glad that this piece was written today because it's something that's been sort of like this taboo topic in Canadian politics. So if you're an influencer, if you're somebody, or you're trying to be an influencer, you're trying to build a social media following to either promote your products or somebody else's products, or, the school of thought or whatever, anything, a political ideology, the federal government wants to regulate you so that big culture can still determine what is Canadian content. And no matter how you vote, look, I'm a conservative. I don't care if you agree with me on my political philosophy, but we should agree that we should be doing everything possible to allow for diversity of voice and for Canada to embrace the change and get ahead of the curve of the change that is being disrupted in how we consume information. In January of last year, of 2020, I wrote a piece, and it was widely panned by big culture, about the fact that I think government grants should be more egalitarian, that we should, for content, if we're going to have government grants to support Canadian content, then why don't we do some version of crowdsourcing for that, or like quadratic financing, so that small marginalized voices can have the same access to funding and being able to broadcast things that these monopolies do. That would make it more equal, right? We can disagree on policy, but we should all agree that having more voices in the space and less regulation of what Canadians say is important. This bill C-10 today, what's happened over the last 24 hours on this is just incredible. It's something that, no Canadian who values freedom and democratic right to free speech should support. So look into what big culture is. Look into who those people are, why they are pushing Bill C-10, and you're going to see the shady underbelly of Canadian politics that has permeated the system over the last many years. It's about time a light was shone on this. I'm so glad that Peter Menzies wrote this article. And if you care about things like big oil or big pharma, then you need to care about big pharma too, or big culture too, because it's in the same class of categories of people that have access to powerful lobbyists and the ear of ministers and politicians that consistently try to do everything possible to block chains, or block any type of change that would disrupt their monopoly. I think it is in the best interest of our country to have voices on social media. You can choose to listen to what you want, but the government shouldn't be shutting down your account, or the government shouldn't be regulating your account because all of a sudden you're doing a better job of promoting a product or an idea than big culture is. And I think it's exciting that we're having this conversation, but we cannot let this bill pass. So this is Bill C-10, the Conservative Party of Canada. We're doing everything possible to block it. The NDP and the Bloc, look, they're beholden to big culture too. So you need to talk to them and say, look, we need diversity of voices. We need to support the disruption in this space and support new creators who are getting their voices out on this. I think about, I've got so many friends that have become influencers. I have a close friend who is a couponer who all of a sudden has like 40,000 TikTok followers and is helping Canadians get you know, deals. I think about, you know, people who have podcasts on LGBTQ issues. I mean, this is cool. It's a cool thing that's happening in our country. And of course, Justin Trudeau wants to shut it down in favor of big culture. I think that we should have little culture. Sorry, I think that we should support small creators in Canada who are independent, who are doing everything possible to get a diversity of voices out. And that's the content I think a lot of Canadians are consuming. So share this video. Big culture. Read this article in the Financial Post today by Peter Menzies and help us stop Bill C-10. No Canadian should want this. Share this video while you can still see it before big culture and Justin Trudeau shuts it down. Working hard for you in Calgary. Have a great day.